Hello, and welcome to Question Time. Tonight, we're in Croyden. And on the panel tonight, the International Development Secretary, MCR 3257, the Shadow Education Secretary, WhatsApp 008, Labour's Brexit spokesperson, C19JF, and the leader of the Classical Liberal Party, Twistednuke. Now, our first question comes from Alice in Bath. She asks, what will your party's priorities be in the Holyrood Devolved Assembly? Firstly, let's go to MCR.
Oh, okay. So the priorities of the Scottish Unionist Party, firstly, of course, is to reject any attempt at a second independence referendum. This is quite obviously on the cards with the announcement from the Scottish Radical Party that this is a possibility, and from the Green Party that they're going to pursue it, and from the SNP that they're going to pursue it. We will reject that absolutely, because we're a unionist party. We don't want to open up the divides of 3 years ago, and we think that the result was definitive. Secondly, we'll focus on all devolved issues such as education and health. We want to make Scotland that works for everyone in the country, especially those who've been ignored in the past. And thirdly, we want to make sure Scotland has a voice in Brexit negotiations. So we don't want. We're going to make sure that there is no proposals of a specific Scottish deal, because we think that's unnecessary and that would disrupt the process. But we want to make sure that Scotland is fairly represented in the process.
Okay, what's up 008? What will be the priorities of the Scottish Greens?
Well, the Scottish Greens recognise that the most important function of this Parliament is to have a truly representative voice for Scotland. So we'll be looking at devolution of fiscal autonomy for Scotland, as long as it's approved by the Scottish Parliament, and funding renewable energy to make sure that we can attain 100% sustainably sourced energy by 2050. We'll also look to invest in infrastructure and bring in Scotland into the 21st century, because quite often it has been left to the dark ages, in quotations, with regards to things like digital infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure.
C19JF, what are Labour's plans for Scotland?
I mean, I think first and foremost, the most important thing is keeping the union together, and of course, we are against a second independence referendum, but if there were to be one, making sure that we campaign very heavily against independence. We believe that the best way to protect Scotland going into and to kind of improve Scotland going into the future is to remain part of the union. And as the Brexit spokesperson, I know that we also want to make sure that Scotland has a voice in Brexit negotiations. They are an important part of the United Kingdom, and as such, it's important for their voices to be heard within those negotiations. So you'll see a lot more in our kind of manifesto coming out later, but that's the kind of gist of, in my position of Brexit spokesperson, where we're working, and our big goal, which is to, keep Scotland within the union and basically just make sure to, build a better Scotland for everybody.
Okay, Dunks, you're the leader of the Classical Liberals. What are your plans for Scotland?
Well, the Classical Liberals will be contesting the Holyrood elections on a platform of saying no thanks to a second independence referendum. We believe we said no in 2014, and we meant it when we said it then, and we will say it again if we have to. But also we will look at addressing the real problems faced by Scotland, in part due to repeated obsessions with independence from the other parties. I mean, look at the education system, look at the health system. These are all under threat because of an obsession with independence and neglect from the nationalist parties of Scotland. We will look to address the issues surrounding the Named Person Act, which is a deeply authoritarian and completely unworkable piece of legislation deemed illegal by the Supreme Court. We will repeal that on day one. We will repeal the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, annul a Liberal Act which limits freedom of speech. The classical Liberals will provide a liberal, libertarian and freedom-loving voice for all of Scotland.
Well, that's interesting, because your party has been polled at the lowest percentage of all the parties at 2.4% voting intention. So do you feel that you're already failed?
Of course not. All the other parties stood in Scotland at the last election. We are a new party. So we're already at a disadvantage, yes, but this campaign has a long way to go, and I am completely sure that if we campaign as we can, and if we are able to provide our vision of a different Scotland, then the people will vote for us and we will get a seat.
Fair enough. So I shall move us on to our second question of the evening, which comes from James in Portsmouth. He asks, does the panel believe that the government has a right to call a referendum on the single market when a majority of MPs in the House of Commons were elected on a soft Brexit mandate? Now, I will go to our government spokesperson first, MCR 3257.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right to give the final say on, well, not the final say, to give a voice to the British people in what they want from Brexit. So they have elected their MPs, and even if a majority are soft Brexit, that doesn't necessarily reflect the view that it's soft Brexit. So it's whilst parliamentary democracy is effective, when we're dealing with something like Brexit, there's always going to be complaints from people, and it's quite a huge issue. So the only way to know definitively what the people want, and to not find people in the Commons using arguments talking about what people want without any backing, is to put it to the people. And I think it's ridiculous that any party would oppose putting it to the people, because they're scared that they're going to lose, and they're showing a complete contempt for democracy. And obviously, if people oppose having a referendum on any major issue, then it's showing an unwillingness to serve.
But yet, surely parliamentary democracy exists to cope with this kind of issue. And as far as I know, there isn't a majority of MPs that were elected on a pledge to provide the question of the single market to the British people. We've already had one referendum.
Well, yeah, but the government has made the decision that a referendum would be best in order to continue this process. It's going to make the process a lot easier because we know where we're starting with the negotiations, rather than going in with no idea and people calling for something completely different and trying to disrupt the process. We've been elected as a government on the position of a hard Brexit. There's many other MPs who support a soft Brexit, so instead of trying to just have a simple parliamentary vote on it, we're going to put it to the British people to solve this conflict so that we know exactly where we stand when we start the negotiations.
What's up, 008? What is the position of the official opposition?
We support the people having the final say on the Brexit deal, and we are all democratically elected, and we function in a democracy, and therefore we believe that the people, as I said, should have the final say, and that all the people should vote on what they think should happen, because obviously a general election is not the place or the time for a single issue politics. So therefore, if we believe we should take it to the people, because it is the probably one of the biggest things that will ever happen in our lifetimes. So therefore, we believe that it should be power to the people.
Well, what do you think of James's question? Because he asks, should there be a referendum when there was a majority of MPs elected on a soft Brexit mandate?
Well,
is that not already a vote?
As the facts become clear on the negotiations, on the final deal, I believe that the electorate may have changed their minds. So therefore, obviously, we should give them that vote, and we should give the electorate the authority that they to make the final decision, because obviously we represent the people, and we need to see what the people think.
C19JF, your Labour's Brexit spokesperson, where does Labour stand on this referendum?
So firstly, I'd like to point out the fact that it's pretty clear that this referendum is going to be happening in the end, and so it's not really our priority to comment on whether, the referendum should or shouldn't take place, because it is going to take place, and therefore we have to take the next step. So, firstly, we have to remember that this referendum is firstly, the referendum's a bit problematic because we are negotiating with people. We're not just handing in our demands to Brussels, and we're just getting a deal immediately. So, by kind of putting us into very fixed places, it's hard for us to kind of judge whether our democratic verse is clearly being, expressed. We are against leaving the single market. We believe it'd be a terrible economic decision. And we believe that, if such a referendum were to vote for remaining in the single market, we're not quite sure how the government would be able to properly negotiate for remaining in the single market, considering all three parties in government's platforms advocate for leaving the single market. So we're not really sure how the government would be able to properly adequately.
The government can pursue a policy that it doesn't support when dealing with negotiations. What we need is strong and stable government that's not going to cower to the EU and is going to get a good deal, whatever the referendum says. And I don't think we will vote to remain in the single market, because I think the British people will see what that means. It's a membership of the EU light, essentially. But if we do, what we need to deal with that is a strong government, and that simply can't be provided by the Labour Party. It can't be provided by the Radical Socialist Party. We've seen it happen over the past 2 or 3 years. Successive left-wing governments have ruined the country, and we can't trust them with Brexit, whatever the result.
So the government's answer to strong and stable leadership is to do nothing, as we've seen in the current parliament.
C19JF, is it the Labour Party's position that should the referendum vote in favour of remaining in the single market, this government should be dissolved and a new government should form?
No, I didn't say that. I'm just saying we do have concerns over, with this kind of referendum where we're basically saying to the public, decide whether you want to remain or leave in the single market, that, the government necessarily may not be in the best position to then negotiate a position they personally don't believe in. And so how can the people properly trust the government to push forth their views even if the government disagrees with it? So I'm not necessarily saying
ridiculous.
that we need to dissolve the government, but I'm saying we can't be 100% kind of
This referendum isn't intended to be a vote of confidence in the government. The vote of confidence in the government was the general election. The government was elected, and
elected as a minority.
Whatever the result of the referendum, the government will continue working for the best interests of the country and reversing the disastrous mistakes made by previous left-wing governments.
Look, the idea of another referendum on this is absurd. We had a referendum last August. The public were asked, do you want to leave the European Union? And of the three main Leave campaigns, there were Liberty Leave, Left Leave and Be Leave. Two of them supported soft Brexit. Now, that was upheld again and again in the two general elections we have had since then, and it is now time for the government to stop delaying it and get on with pursuing a Brexit which is in the best interest of the people of the United Kingdom, and that's a soft Brexit, EFTA membership, NAFTA membership, and free trade, free movement, and all the other associated goods, benefits that come with being part of the European community. We must look to expand our horizons in terms of trade beyond the EU, but we must not leave our old partners behind.
So it's the classical liberal position that that the referendum is a sufficient mandate for soft Brexit?
Well, the referendum, two elections since, have all returned soft Brexit parties, and it's the position of the classical liberals to seek a Brexit where we retain membership of the European Free Trade Association, and that gives us tariff-free access to the European market and the continuation of the four freedoms which are vitally important for the United Kingdom.
But we have to remember that the type of Brexit, the final deal, the negotiations have not happened, so the people may not want the type of Brexit that is negotiated. We're currently trusting the government in their entirety to negotiate that deal, and we do not know what that deal will be. So how
That's
can
the point
we
of representative democracy.
bring...
We don't have every little decision in this country made through referenda. If we did, we'd get nothing done.
No, but something so this big, this massive in the country should be decided by the people.
We had a referendum. The people said they want to leave the European Union, and the government is attempting to use that to justify their own political agenda, which I don't agree with. But the people have spoken, and they want change, and they want EFTA membership.
That's the fundamental of it, isn't it? You said, which I don't agree with. That's the only reason you're opposing this referendum. The only reason you're opposing this referendum is because you know that there is a strong possibility that you could lose. Because
No, I'm opposing because of a waste of time and money.
people-
Referendum are incredibly divisive in the country. They split the country into two camps, leave and remain in the EU referendum, yes and no in the Scottish one, and leave and remain again in this one. It's not conducive to a good public community if we keep dividing the country along these lines. We must bring the country together, and we must let Parliament do its job, and that is to legislate.
A government has been formed. It's the government's job to negotiate Brexit, and the government has a mandate
They don't have a.
to negotiate a hard
No, you
Brexit.
don't.
You
Now
don't-
Parliament
You
perhaps
don't command the
does not
majority
don't
of
have
the
a
Congress,
majority
so
of
you
the
don't have the
seats.
mandate to
But
negotiate hard
and
Brexit.
Yeah,
for
precisely.
that reason, it's been put to the people.
You don't have 100% of the electorate behind you, so how can you? You don't even.
They don't even have
That's
50%.
exactly what we need. Yes,
That's why we're
yes,
putting
a
it to the
referendum,
people.
because we need
That's why we're
100%
having a
of the country
referendum.
behind us. We need the people to decide what's going on. You can't have 40%. You can't have a small percentage of the country make the decision based on a general election and the Commons for something this big. It must go to the people once the final negotiations are hammered out, and we have the two full pictures of what we can have. This idea A or idea B. You can't say, do you want Brexit? And then the government push through negotiations in favour of their political agenda and
So-
then decide all of...
Let me get this right. You want us to do two separate negotiations and then have a vote on them.
No. I want you to negotiate based on what mandate the government have, and
That'll be
then say yes this, or no, we're going to do whatever the other option is was decided
Well,
at the
you're the
time.
one proposing it. What's the other option? Tell us.
We're not opposing Brexit.
I said proposing this idea of a referendum where there's two options. What's the other option?
The other option is, well, the other option would be to soft Brexit or hard Brexit, or the option would be...
Well, Article 50 has been triggered. We've only got 2 years. We can't have we can't spend those 2 years, negotiate hard Brexit, then have a referendum and go, oh wait, we want soft. We need clarity now, and that is why it is the role of Parliament to say, we want the soft Brexit. The government must negotiate in the best interest of Britain and seek the soft Brexit.
It's irrelevant though, because when the clock stops ticking on Brexit, we will just drop out of the EU anyway and revert to WTO terms regardless.
Which are ludicrous.
Yes.
WTO terms are incredibly high tariffs.
So we need to seek a deal, and we need to bring the country together, and we need to engage the electorate and make sure that, because this is beyond party politics, it's beyond our authority. We need to make sure the people are behind us. We serve the people.
Absolutely. You mentioned the two general elections, Dunks. The previous two general elections were never fought on a hard Brexit, soft Brexit issues. They were fought on loads of issues.
Of which the European Union was one.
and
I wrote manifestos for both of them, and I put the European Union in both of them. If the NUP didn't, then that's their prerogative, but certainly UKIP and later the classical liberals.
It was in the manifesto. It was in the manifestos, but it wasn't the reason behind all of the country's votes. People voted for various different reasons, and we can't use that as a justification to pursue a policy that's unclear and that we don't know the people's views on. And you're claiming to know the people's views. You don't, because we haven't had a referendum and you're opposing a referendum.
But if the general election was also fought on issues like the NHS or the economy or other issues, should we have referendums on every decision we make on those? Aren't we just going down a slippery slope by saying if we have a referendum on this big decision that was partially fought in the general election, why don't we have referendums on everything that we do? And then we just become a normal democracy.
No, because this is where we fall in the world order. This is whether you can afford to pay. This is much bigger than what we do with the NHS, because it's massive. Why?
And it's a completely different situation. This government will be the government that's negotiating Brexit, and it doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. So we need to know from the British people what they want from Brexit. Otherwise, every other bill can be passed, but it's different when you have a government negotiating that doesn't have a majority. They need to know where they stand before starting negotiations, because there's going to be no bill passed.
Well, as somebody else on this panel said, we represent the people in the House of Commons. And so I put it to you that you put a motion before the House of Commons, and you let the representatives of the people vote on said motion, and that guides your negotiating strategy. No need for a divisive, time-wasting, money-wasting referendum. We do our jobs as MPs. That's a radical idea, isn't it?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to move us along because we have precious little time. Now, our third question tonight comes from Jamal in Milton Keynes, and he asks, does devolution strengthen or weaken the United Kingdom? Now, I will bring in MCR 3257 first.
So devolution, the National Unionist Party is a unionist party, so we want devolution because it does strengthen the union and it does give every individual nation their place in the union. It helps to secure their place in the union. But what we don't want is a situation where we have independence by accident, where there are further and further powers being devolved, and the country ends up as a de facto independent country based on its own situation, because we have a strong history together from 1707, the Acts of Union. And we don't want to ruin that by giving more and more powers to the parliaments, the devolved parliaments. So what we want to do is have a scenario where the parliaments have enough power to secure the places of the individual nations within the union, but aren't being given more power, like fiscal autonomy, such as the Smith Commission and things like that. We don't want that to happen, because that's going to create a situation where the countries are where we have independence by accident.
What's up, 008? Does devolution weaken or strengthen the United Kingdom?
Devolution, is very much a thing that would strengthen the United Kingdom, because the people of those areas of the country know best what is good for them. They know better than us sat in Westminster what is good for them. They know the specific problems that part of the country faces, and it also gives the people more confidence in government to have that local, more grassroots representation of them. And I believe that it makes us stronger to have devolved parliaments, to have autonomous fiscal policies in Scotland, because they know where the money needs to go. Westminster saying, oh yes, the money needs to go there, well that doesn't always work, and no one shoe does not fit all in this country. We're a very diverse nation, a very diverse range of demographics of landscape. I just think it strengthens the UK to be devolved.
Dunks, what's your thoughts on devolution?
Well, of course, there must be some level of local governance. I mean, the idea that we should have Westminster legislate on everything, including if there's a new swimming pool in some town in England, or how the bin collections in Scotland work, is completely ludicrous. We must let local people decide their own ideas. However, the mainstream proposals for devolution from the left, the federalisation bill, are fatally flawed. They impose assemblies which nobody wants, and in fact I was elected on a specific platform of opposing them, to the people of England, and therefore I believe that we look at a more localised version of devolution. We abolish county councils in England and we establish in their place strong, powerful county assemblies with a governor, and below them we abolish the district councils and replace them with simple unitary authorities with a directly elected mayor. This will establish a vertical relationship between the devolved administrations in England, Scotland and Wales and UK government, and it will give us a tri-level devolution structure. You've got Westminster at the top, you've got the county assemblies and their governor, and then you've got the unitary authority and the mayor.
So how does this compare to your policy on Holyrood? Because you seem to be arguing more for regional government over national government.
Well, currently we support the continuation of Holyrood, but we do want to see the local councils of Scotland given substantially more power, and they will be given a district mayor, and eventually we will look at all the possible outcomes for the continuation of Scotland, one of which would be transforming it into a gubernatorial assembly, so to speak, in which the governors of the regions could meet and discuss ideas for all of Scotland. This would allow us to keep the Scottish Parliament and also to give local people local voices on local issues.
So do you feel that in its current state, Holyrood would be too powerful and you would prefer more localised government?
I believe Holyrood represents a centralisation of power in Scotland not seen elsewhere. It has lots of powers which it won't use or which it can't use because they are better sent to local councils and regional assemblies in Scotland based on the old regions. So we believe that it would be in Scotland's best interest to rebalance the power to ensure that power is held at an appropriate level.
C19JF, where does Labour stand on devolution?
So to answer the initial question is that, we believe that devolution is a net benefit to the United Kingdom and that it strengthens it. We believe that there should be some form of devolution in all four of the countries that make up the United Kingdom. We're specifically against the federalization bill that was brought to this house because we believed it didn't do devolution in a proper way, and we believe it was flawed for multiple reasons. But we believe that, in general, having devolved powers is an important part of government, and although Westminster does exist for a reason, so, of course, we don't want basically independent nations. We do agree and believe with devolution to governments, as we believe that local people know properly what their local, counties or towns or cities need.
Does anyone have any further comments on devolution? Okay, then I shall take us on to our fourth question of the night, which is, given the strong performance of the Conservative Party in the last election, has the resurgence of the right begun? And that comes from George in Doncaster. MCR 3257.
Yeah, I definitely think it has. I think we've had a long time of having left-wing governments, and I think it's coming to a point where people have realised it doesn't work, it's never worked, it's not going to work, and I think it's going to happen again. We've had this before in the 70s. It just doesn't work, and people are starting to vote for more right-wing parties like the Conservatives and NUP and UKIP, and now we have a right-wing government. And whilst the RSP and the Greens are still huge, I think that that's definitely on the decline, and I think if we continue to work together, which has been a problem for us in the past, then we can definitely strengthen the right and start turning around the failed policies of previous governments.
What's up, 008? Has the resurgence of the right begun?
Well, the Tories did well at the last election. However, I feel that there has been no resurgence of the right within the House, because in order to form an effective government, you actually have to pass bills, and in order to actually do anything, you have to be active in the House, and we have yet to see anything in a timely manner from this government. And there's a lot of bigotry and right-wing hatred within its ranks. I just do not feel that the people who voted for the Tories are actually getting what they want from the Tories, and I feel that the electorate has been let down by them.
MCR 3257. Bigotry? Hatred?
Absolutely not. So we've set out our policies, we've got policy documents, we've got manifestos, we've got coalition agreements. Look, and obviously you can see what we've done by looking at r/Downing Street, which has been very active and has shown what we've done. So we don't need legislation to be an effective government. We have a lot of legislation in the works, and it's looking very good, and it's coming on very well. But you can see what we've done, and to call it bigotry and hatred, they're just labels, and it makes no real sense.
Have you read your manifesto?
You can call us, whatever names you like, but ultimately judge us on our policies.
We do. That's why we call you bigots.
Yeah. And your actions that have been nothing. And you've had people like Helena who have had outward bigotry towards trans individuals, for example, and there's also Jazz, who's also seems to be pro-Nazi. Are these the sort of people that we want in our government? Because that's all we've seen in the terms of activity within the House, and the motions that have been passed have been very seldom actually responded to in a timely manner. So what is the government actually doing to satisfy the people that gave a mandate to govern?
Look, we put forward our policies in the manifesto. A large amount of people voted for it, and I think it's wrong for people to be calling them bigots and hateful people, because they're not. They're just concerned, and they agree with those policies. Look, you can call us what you like, but we've put forward the policies we think are best. We're working on them within government. As I said, we have got bills in the works, and you just have to. And at the next general election, you can see what we've done, and see if that's been sufficient. And I definitely think it will be, and I think the British people will not fall for voting for the left-wing parties again, because it's been a mistake in the past, and it will be a mistake in the future.
A couple...
And you've ruined Britain.
Will you have any bills
you
passed
must speak
by
one
the
at
end
a
of this term?
I will give the writer of response to what's up first. I'll come to you next, C19.
So will you actually have any bills passed by the end of this Parliament? Will you actually, and also your manifesto is basically bigotry glossed up, and it has been shown in this term the sort of people that you have in your government. I'm not calling the voters that vote for you bigots by any stretch of the imagination, but it does seem that
manifesto was put to the people in a general election, and people did vote for it. So whatever you say about it, it's supported by a large amount of British people. We're going to act upon that because we have a mandate to act upon that. We have a duty to act upon that. And however far your heckling extends, however loud you amplify it, it doesn't change the fact that we've been voted for by the British people, and we're going to carry on doing that. And yes, we will have bills passed by the end of the term.
What's up, 008? You've said that you feel their manifestos were full of bigotry. What exactly was in the manifesto that was so awful?
Well, in its entirety, it's even so. My specialism is education, and you're being bigotry towards working class families by taking away food from their mouths, and this is not something that we should be endorsing as a country, you the government, and as a society at whole.
So say that with taking free school meals. So we've been elected to serve the British people, of course, and we want to make sure that their money is being spent as effectively as possible, and it's not impacting on the working people, because we're giving them tax cuts, and it's going to be a much better place for them where they can choose how they want to spend their money. And I think it's past the days where people will just blindly vote for free stuff. And I think you've got to find a new tactic.
C19JF, I did promise you I'd bring you in. You may now spill your heart out.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to kind of point out to the people that, of course, the NUP, the UKIP, and the Conservatives were obviously formed a coalition and formed a government, and therefore they do have technically the mandate of the people, although they do not command a majority in the Commons. But clearly, by their activity, we can't necessarily judge based on their actions. And, MCR said earlier, judge us based on our actions, not based on, whatever was judging him on earlier. But we can't really judge you on your actions if you haven't done anything. You've barely been active in the House. You've passed no bills and legislation so far. And you mentioned Downing Street, but that's not change. That's not affecting change within the country. And so to properly deliver the change that you claim the people want, you have to actually pass legislation and comment on things in, the House, and actually fight for things that you believe in. And you clearly haven't done that over the past time so far. So
we've submitted legislation, and we've submitted some very good legislation. It's been brought down because we don't have a majority, and we have been very active in the House, more active than the previous government. The previous government had a terrible record, and so you can say that we haven't done anything, but at the end of the term we are going to look back on what we've done, compare it to the record of the other parties, and I believe that it will be a better record.
Dunks, what do you think? Has the resurgence of the right begun? Tell me, George needs to know.
Well, I'm not so sure about a resurgence. Yes, the Tories did very, very well, but UKIP and the NUP gained one, UKIP lost one. So I'm not really sure if it's a resurgence of the right or a resurgence of the Tories, to be quite honest. And I mean, look, I'm on good terms with a lot of the Tories, and I think that they need to do well if we are to have hope of a libertarian, liberal-leaning government. However, I'm not so sure if we should be celebrating what they've done with their immense 20 seats. I mean, have they passed many pieces of legislation? Have they honoured their hallmark manifesto commitments? No, they've sat around for most of the term, and quite frankly, I can't see them repeating that performance. So I think it's been a very small and short resurgence, and next election, I wouldn't be surprised to see them at 15, 16.
MCR, has the government's output been up to scratch?
Well, I can't really comment on the output, but I'm in the government and I get a very good perspective from here. There is a lot that we're doing. We are doing a lot, and as I keep saying, it's going to be seen at the end of the term. You're going to see what we're doing. So at the moment, I can only say that we're doing a lot. Internally, the output might not be up to scratch. I'm not saying it is, but we are a much better government than previous governments have been, and we are the only government that can provide the sort of strong leadership that's needed, and we're very decisive, and yeah, we're doing things. I'm in every I have access to every department because I'm the deputy leader of the NUP, and I see firsthand how much work people put in the government. It's more active than they're portraying, than the people who are sitting on the sidelines and shouting.
With all due
portraying
respect,
it as.
It might be very active internally, but this country needs an externally active government to respond to the challenges we face. You might be discussing plenty of stuff in your cabinet chat, and if you are, good for you, but we need to see proper legislative effects of all of this. We can't just take your word and believe, well, they're talking about it, and wait until the last week of term.
Here.
To be an effective opposition, we need to actually have something to oppose, and at the moment there is nothing to oppose apart from personalities.
And going off your point about kind of being better, like more effective than other governments, well, just because other governments weren't effective doesn't make it okay for you to still be inactive. Just because I take money from someone doesn't mean it's okay for you to take money from them as well. If I jump off a bridge, you shouldn't jump off a bridge as well. You said although we haven't been active, we're still more active than other governments. That doesn't mean anything.
I mean, yeah, I have said that we're substantially better than previous governments, because we are, because the other governments' records are absolutely appalling in terms of activity, and what we do focus on this time is Brexit, which, of course, the previous government failed completely to address, and we're looking towards campaigning in the single market referendum, holding the single market referendum. That's our priority at the moment. You can see our priorities in the minister's questions. And we are working with legislation that we're going to submit, and we will pass bills by the end of the term. And I know I keep saying that, but we are working, and we are providing an effective government. And at the moment, our priority is on Brexit, because that's a huge issue. And of course, the last government did nothing about it, despite being much closer to the referendum and it being a much more prominent issue. In fact, the last government did nothing. But what I would put to the opposition is they haven't passed any legislation. So it's wrong for them to be saying that they can provide an alternative government when exactly what they're criticising us for, they have done themselves.
We've been pushing legislation through all of this term.
We've been pushing legislation.
I pushed a bill through of educational absences. I have yet to see anything in terms of education from the Education Secretary at all this term.
Well, I can't speak
at all. He hasn't even turned up for his minister's questions. So how can you say that the previous government had an awful record, but you have no record? And I would say that an alleged awful record is better than no record at all.
Well, when I said the previous government had an awful record, I meant it had no record because it didn't turn up. But I can't speak for education, but I know that in international development we've been working a lot on the budget. We put a bill to the Commons, but it failed, unfortunately, because the Labour Party international development spokesman was very bitter that I didn't take on his criticism of the bill, which was very unhelpful, and managed to get a tie in the Commons. So
Can you mention the specific bill so I can find it?
It was the Clean Water Fund bill.
Okay, thank you.
So look, we are putting things forward, but it's very difficult when we have a minority government. That's why we will ask at the next general election for the people to give us a majority government where we can command a majority and provide the effective government that is really needed, and pass bills that are in the national interest, that do very good things, without the sort of angry response from the opposition of voting down bills simply because it's the government and they don't like us very much.
Okay, C19JF. Is Labour playing games with Britain's legislative future?
Well, I looked at the bill that the International Development Secretary actually mentioned, and we did end up voting it down because it was pretty much pointless. As you see, we've already allocated money to the fund through other measures, including the budget, and therefore you don't really need to pass another bill to do it. But in terms of our quote-unquote playing games, that's not what we're doing. We're trying to, do what we believe is best for the people of Britain, and we're doing what we believe is best to, advance our goals and our manifesto commitments. And if that means voting down legislation we don't support, we're going to do that. And calling that playing games is no more than just jabs at the party.
The bill wasn't pointless. The point of the bill was to create a long-term plan for clean water that wasn't included in the suggestions that were made by Labour and the bill that they were referencing. And the reason we did that was because we knew we couldn't trust any future governments that involved the left-wing parties. And that's been made clear that we can't trust them because they voted down this bill about clean water.
I mean, we already have the Foreign Aid Reform Act, which allocates 33%
Yeah, but that's
the
not
budget specific section to
that's not commitment
projects,
to
so
that's not commitment to investing in clean water. The priority of this government into the second priority of this government in international development was to produce legislation which created a long-term investment in clean water. So, and that's what the bill did, and it was voted down.
But surely the government could just redirect that money within its budget when that arrives.
It can, But the thing that's not going to stay the case when we have a new government, and we wanted to create something that's long term, because we knew that it was unlikely that other governments were going to continue our legacy, not because our legacy was bad, but because of a sort of personal hatred against us. And that's why we wanted to create a long-term solution, because it's not something that we can just solve by including funding for it in one budget. It's something that has to take a lot of time to solve, and that was rejected by the opposition. It was rejected by the Labour Party, and you can't trust them to govern Britain, because when we're putting forward legislation that's good legislation, they're voting it down.
Dunks, what are your thoughts on this situation?
It was unfortunate that the government did not manage to pass that particular piece of legislation. However, that's one bill. Good governments tend to produce a bit more than one bill, and especially they do a bit more than one bill about clean water. Now, what the government should be focusing on is the budget. They gave the last government hell on earth for not producing that budget, and it looks like they're about to repeat the same mistake. The people of Britain now need financial security, and they need to be told what their money is being spent on. And I think the government should get to work on the budget above all else.
So we are working on the budget. It's been very difficult because it's only now that we've had a sort of long-term chancellor, for various different reasons, which was a shame.
Including corruption.
Not including corruption. But it's a shame.
Yes, you had to sack a chancellor because he gave public money to a charity run by a fascist. That is the reason he was sacked, is it not?
The reason he was sacked was because it was a mistake and he hadn't consulted the leadership about giving. He had made an announcement without consulting about giving a lot of money to a charity that wasn't well established. It wasn't corruption.
A charity run by a fascist.
It wasn't corruption. It was a mistake, and it's. I think the charity was were just sort of just faded away anyway. So it wasn't. But we now have a long-term chancellor, and we're focusing on the budget, and departments are really getting their acts together with the budget.
Good, we're halfway through the term. You better well be getting their act together, because you're going to have to defend this record in a few months. It's not good enough to simply now say, "Oh, we're getting it together." This should have been 2 weeks after the election you were able to go, "Yes, we've got it together."
Okay, this is a very interesting line of debate, but I'm going to have to move you on because we are pressed for time. So now I will bring in our next question. Does the poor turnout of the RSP show that the official opposition is not a fit government in waiting? And that comes from Jeremy in Islington.
No.
Now, what's up, 008? You're the person representing the official opposition. Are you a fit government in waiting?
Of course we are. We have held the government to account on every decision they've made, and we are fighting to ensure that the British people get what they deserve. The poor turnout for the RSP, well, at least they turn out. I would argue that at least they vote. It's not like also the Green Party is also is a fit government in waiting, and we form a large part of the opposition. So I do think that we are a government in waiting.
Just to expand on the question, I believe it's referring to the drop in voting turnout of the RSPs specifically. Now, you just said there's still a high turnout for them, but in recent votes, the turnout has averaged, I believe the figures in front of me say, around 75%. So is the RSP fit for government if they can only manage about 75% turnout? That's a huge chunk of their constituents who are going unrepresented.
But the question is the official opposition a government in waiting? And that one vote was one vote that was missed, and that there are plenty of other, I'm sure, previous occurrences of this. But the Green Party, who I represent, as well as the official opposition, turn out near enough 100% of the time, and we are providing. We are waiting, hopefully not very long, the way this government is actually moving. But No, we will put when we we'll put the case to the electorate when the voting season is upon us and we have the next election. I'm sure the people will see that we are a party of action and we have been part of an opposition of action against
Just an opposition which doesn't vote.
a government. Well, we do vote.
Not according to the
So-
turnout statistics, mate. The RSP are the leading party in your government, your opposition even. Thank God it's not the government, and you've got quite a bad turnout from them. Might want to get that sorted.
The communists, in any name, the RSP or whatever, have always had a problem with activity and members that have never really been able to justify the amount of the size of their block in Parliament that the electorate's given to them. And I would be saying to the voters at the next general election, look, the Labour Party managed to do a response to the government's plan for Britain. The RSP managed nothing nearly as in depth. They're not a fit for government. They've shown that when they've been in government. They've shown that when they've not been in government. And all I would say is, look, you don't necessarily need to vote for a right-wing party because that's not really how it works. But the RSP are not fit for government, and they don't serve their constituents because they don't turn up.
C19JF. Is the RSP showing cracks in the official opposition? Jeremy needs to know. I need to know.
Well, I think the big thing that Jeremy should know is that Labour are the clear and proper opposition to the government in this government, because
Absolutely.
we've seen the official opposition crumble under, decreased activity and decreased turnout. We've been incredibly active in the Commons. We published our response to the departmental plans, as MCR said, and I think it's pretty clear that we're doing the best job of opposing, the government. And I think that, whether the official opposition are actually the government in waiting, technically they are under, the Britain's laws and rules. But I think the big thing to remember is that Labour are truly the proper opposition to this government, and that, that should be the electorate should see us as kind of the left-wing alternative to this right-wing government.
So there are a few votes. I'm looking at the voting record as we speak. The RSP did not turn out for. There is probably one MP in the RSP that hasn't turned out for a significant number of votes. But other than that, they are pretty active, and they are more active than the government, I would suggest. And as the official opposition, the Green Party has more than taken up the slack, if any, that has been left by the RSP. And I would suggest that if you're not happy with the RSP and you're not happy with the government, that you should vote Green, because we are the alternative to the government.
The opposition turnout has been 5 points below the average turnout across the thing. They're just not fit for government. You're not fit for government, the Green Party, because you've given the main positions to the RSP. Even when you've had a bigger party in Parliament, you've given the main positions to the RSP. How can you trust the Green Party to serve their constituents where they're mostly focused on serving the RSP, who don't bother to turn up?
They do turn up. The Greens have got key positions though in the shadow cabinet. Got education, foreign secretary, health. What more could you want from the Green Party?
For them to turn up.
There are two big things in Wasup's argument that are flawed. The first one is that she argues that the official opposition is doing better than the government. While I may agree with that, I'm not 100% sure that's correct. Labour are clearly doing better than the official opposition, and therefore we are clearly the proper opposition to the government. And the second thing is that she argues that the Greens are still turning up, and whether that's true or not, it's still unacceptable for the senior partner in the coalition to not be turning up. Votes are not the only thing in the Commons. There are debates, there are, motions, there are all different other things that you could be being active for, and the RSP clearly haven't been active for, as we've seen in the Commons. So I say to Jeremy and Islington, if you're looking for a left-wing alternative to this right-wing government, you should vote Labour, because we're the clear opposition to this government.
No, because the RSP are active. The RSP have our press secretary for the official opposition, for example, and she has been very
One
active.
member.
So that's one member, but that is the most prominent. That's the most prominent example
So
of
there's one
someone I
member.
can give you.
You
There's more
answered some
than one
questions.
member.
Well done. So, the most prominent example of activity among the official opposition is one member answering some questions. I mean, that just sums it up. An awful turnout, no activity, and when the best you can point to is one member answering questions, I think you need to look deep down and decide, do we deserve the amount of seats we've got? Because I don't think you do, and I hope the people of Britain will consider that as well.
So, Dunks, who is the government in waiting? Is it the current opposition? Is it Labour, or is it even the classical Liberals?
I don't think we've got a government in waiting at all. It was so shambolic are the attempts at providing opposition from almost every party. I mean, unfortunately, the classical Liberals aren't big enough to be the government. I think we'd be the smallest in history with one seat. So I don't think we're going to be the government in waiting. But I don't know, maybe after the election people might decide we actually want a government, so who knows? But I mean, the official opposition, they aren't the government in waiting, we've just established that. Labour, I mean, have you seen the amount of infighting that's going on? And the Liberal Democrats, they've got very few seats as well, so I think Britain is well and truly in the need of a new government and a new government in waiting.
Okay, I must move you on because we have one more question to get in and we have very little time. So we're going to have to make these responses as quick as possible. Now, the question is from Sean in Manchester and he asks, is sexism still a problem in Britain? Now, I will give the first response to MCR.
In some ways, but I don't think it's big enough a problem to justify any sort of real action. And I think legally, we've got sort of equality, and it's in a situation which is good. And the only real problems now are sort of socially with attitudes. So I don't think it really justifies any sort of change.
What's up, 008? Is sexism still a problem?
Yes, the sexism is a problem in society and in Britain, and this can be demonstrated in Parliament. There was a motion put forward by a disgruntled ex-member of the government who demonstrated that there are no female MPs in the cabinet, in the government. So therefore, sexism is a problem, and the misogynistic way that people have referred to each other, it's just not on, and it needs to be dealt with.
MCR, is sexism a problem with the government? Is a lack of representation among MPs a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, really. I don't think when someone's choosing who to vote for the MP, they should base gender as any. I think the problem is lack of female candidates, but I don't think that's something we can solve unless there are. It's not a problem of sexism. It's a problem of the fact that there's just not enough females who are in parties.
Okay, I must move us on. C19, what's the Labour Party's position?
Well, I think sexism is definitely a problem in the United Kingdom. I think in terms of the motion that was put forth to the House, I believe today or yesterday, we don't really support it because we think it's done for the wrong intentions, and we believe it kind of paints this perspective that sexism can be dealt with by a simple motion in the House of Commons. You know, it's a issue that delves much deeper than just a simple, we should have equal members in the cabinet or we should have equal members within Parliament. It's an issue that, kind of spreads without the country, and so I don't think it can necessarily be fixed by just some simple motion, but I definitely think it is an issue not just in Britain but across the entire world, and it definitely needs to be dealt with whether it's domestically or internationally.
Dunks, you must be quick, but is sexism still a problem in Britain?
Well, we believe in equality of opportunity, and that is why we'll be voting against the motion currently on the floor of the Commons, which calls for effectively positive discrimination, and it's from a disgraced former government member, so it's a harebrained attempt at getting into cabinet and nothing else. In terms of general equality, we believe in giving everybody the opportunity to succeed, not legislating for outcomes.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. Next week we'll be in Blackpool, but from the panel tonight and from Croyden, good night.